Hi, welcome to Commander Runningcloud's log. This show is a little different from my usual political kind of content because my last career was training to be a professor, and as you know, Henry Louis Gates Jr. of Harvard, Hazel Carby of Yale University, Vera Kuczynski of Vanderbilt, Brent Hayes Edwards of Columbia, and Valerie Smith of Swarthmore have all depended upon my scholarship to get ahead in their lives, which is why I'm a quantum PhD instead of just a PhD, because I'm the one that teaches the PhDs. I'm the one that provided the PhDs with intellectual property assets. So what I want to talk to you about right now is that one of the businesses that the Runningcloud group is involved with is homeschooling. From the beginning of my interest in from the beginning of my interest in creating a career outside of the academy, I wanted to be involved with homeschoolers, because one thing I learned as a graduate student in particular is how unnecessary it is for someone else to validate your work. How once you understand intellectual activity, you don't need anyone to tell you when you've done it right, or when to stop, or when to start. Early childhood educator Maria Montessori also discovered this, and in her schools, the ones that are classic Montessori schools, the students are given the opportunity to pursue their own intellectual interests. They don't have like an hour for this and an hour for that. They can take as long as they want to develop their ideas and to do projects. At the Near North Montessori School in Chicago, the students were accomplishing, my children especially, well, my son was accomplishing miraculous things because the students were allowed to do whatever they wanted to, and they were supplied equipment. So when my son was just 4 or 5 years old, he was doing world maps with paper on the floor, which was paper on the floor that was bigger than this carpet, 5x7 paper to draw. And he was doing it with his friend Sebastian. And they were allowed to do it until they were finished. Now, one of the things that I learned as a graduate student was that the people who got the credentials got it from stealing the work of other people. Even Sheldon L. Epstein depended on the work of students to get his money and to push his career ahead. So being a student is probably the best thing that you can be. But a lot of people feel that they need to get outside approval. Okay, so parents that are doing homeschooling face special challenges because a lot of the times they've chosen to homeschool because of their politics, that they don't believe in teaching the points of view that the Europeans are promoting through their centralized educational system. And that was going to be my target audience, was Indigenous Americans. Indigenous means Black and Indian, American Indian, were my populations that I was going to serve, because I know that the Europeans are already being served well by their educational system. And if you're a Jew, you can go to Hebrew school on top of the regular education. So they pretty much had it covered for themselves. And at the Jewish community centers, the JCCs, they always had after-school activities. But a lot of Black communities do not have social services because we didn't get World War II refugee entitlements. And we got classified as a certain class of people, even when we weren't. But I'll talk about that later. Anyway, this is a review of some wonderful material I've gotten. These are test prep flashcards. This one is produced by Test Prep Books, but a company called Momix also makes some really great flashcards. And I just wanted to share these with you because I'm super excited about it. This is the AP English Language and Composition flashcard set. And you can see there are quite a few cards in this collection, quite a few. And I was so impressed. You know, some of the things in this set of cards I didn't learn until I was a graduate student in literature. And this company has accumulated so much information in one place. And I love it because one of the biggest problems with homeschooling, aside from trying to figure out the best curriculum, is trying to get access to textbooks. Okay? There's been a lot of control on textbooks. In fact, an African filmmaker, from the 1980s or 90s, made a movie in French, but in English, the translation is Africa, we will fleece you. And it was about how France maintained control of the publishing industry so that the Francophone countries in Africa, like Sierra Leone and Cameroon and other ones in that area that the French Europeans colonized, they were not allowed to print their own textbooks, which means that they would get secondhand books, they would get old knowledge. They didn't have control of it. And an African filmmaker made a film about how frustrating it is to not be able to control the means of production for your own education and to not be able to produce books for your own education. This French colony, Francophone, they call it, this Francophone protest about the educational system was started by Camara Lay in his book, The Black Boy, where he talks about being a student in Africa of an outstanding caliber and then deciding to go to France because after World War II, the French told every soldier that fought for them from Africa that they were Frenchmen too, and they could always come to France, and they presented France as a superior place. So in fact, one filmmaker, Sembene Osmane, I think his name is, and he actually, Senegal maybe, I think he's Senegalese, he made a film called The Black Girl, La Fille Noire, and yeah. And this movie was about a woman who worked as a servant for French people who lived in her country. And they had a big mansion in her country, but in France, they just had a little apartment. And she went into a deep depression because she thought that the Europeans, the Frenchmen, would have a better home in France than they had in their own land. And what Camara Lay found out and memorialized in his book, in translation, was that when he went to France as a top-tier African student, he was only given options to be things like a mechanic. He wasn't given the opportunity to be educated as an engineer. He was automatically treated as a second-class citizen. So a lot of Africans after World War II, after they put their lives on the line for the Europeans who wanted to fight each other, they were very disappointed to find out that one, France wasn't anything like it was cracked up to be, and two, they didn't get the respect that they were guaranteed. So finding textbooks in America can be very difficult too, because there's so much control of the textbook industry, and it's all controlled by the Europeans. And during during segregated schools, one of the reasons why Black educators were saying they wanted equal, they didn't want integration. They just wanted equal access to the resources, was because they would get old, worn, used books, out-of-date books for their schools. Just like when Julius Rosenwald sold my great-grandfather Bo's deck cheap materials for building the Lima Elementary School, while the Europeans had big brick schools that are still standing. But my grandfather's school is crumbled into dust, and I can't get access to the land. So one of the things that homeschooling parents face that's a real challenge is access to good learning materials. Well, not with these flashcards. With these flashcards, you can teach yourself and you can teach your children, and they're fun to use. You can make games out of them. You can categorize them, for different grade levels, because they present material that's so easy to understand that if you've got an advanced child, your child can just take their own hand and read these materials and learn to understand as they go along. Once I met an 8-year-old girl and I said, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And do you want to know what she said to me? I am a novelist. I know, that's what she said. She said, I am a novelist. You see, I'm a novelist too. I haven't written a novel, but I'm a novelist. I've been building the skills for it. I've been doing social media instead, because frankly, when the time in my life came when I would write that novel, most people were not interested in reading books. They were hooked on cyberspace. So I've written all my books in cyberspace. And I think I still hold the record for the most tweets in the shortest amount of time over on Twitter. But Elon Musk won't recognize me because he's a terrible Werner von Braun Nazi. Okay, so look at this one. This is time. They will also offer you a free test taking video. If you give them some feedback. So, there's an extra thing for you to use. Now, this is just the first card, and it says first person on it, which, narratology is what this is. And this is like, how do you tell a story? Well, when you tell a story, you have to tell it from a perspective, right? You have a certain perspective to tell your story. And when you're deciding to write a story, you have to decide, how am I going to tell it? From what point of view am I going to tell this story? Well, this set of cards will give you all the options. First person. That's when you say, this happened to me. I this, I that, this happened to me. And on back, it'll tell you, it writes something. Some writers naturally find it easier to tell stories from their own point of view. And it goes on like that. And it'll also tell you second person. In novels and other fictional works, the second person is the narrative voice most seldom used, because it gets awkward, it says. Second person is when it says you. So, you can imagine if you're trying to tell a story and you're constantly reflecting on the reader. So they say that the second person is best for how-to manuals. You do this, you do that. But then there's the most popular narrative, and that's the third person narrative. And that's where you use he and she pronouns. And then most books include, even when it's in first or second person, the omniscient narrator. And the omniscient narrator is not directly named, but tells the story sort of like an inherent conversation. It's sort of the invisible narrator. So this is like a foundational piece of narratology, of literary structure. And then it'll talk about biases, stereotypes, peer-reviewed sources. Now you see, this is where Biases are important to teach even to little children, I think. Stereotypes, very important to teach if you're not European, because you'll be guided. A lot of people will be judging you by the stereotypes, so it's important to recognize them. But this one, peer-reviewed sources, well, this one is graduate school level, right? So as a homeschooling parent, you might talk about this with younger children, but generally speaking, younger children are not writing articles for journals where they need experts in the field to review their materials. And that's what this is. So you're going to have to sort through it. It'll talk about the parts of a book, the table of contents, the index. It'll talk about chapters, headings, the foreword. Why would you put a foreword in? These are mostly for scholarly books. The preface, again, mostly for scholarly books. The sidebar, the footnotes. Now, I noticed it didn't have endnotes. Endnotes became popular when I was in grad school, but they were not in college. And footnotes can be really the most aggravating thing that you have to do, because it's where you have to document everybody you referred to, everybody that went into thinking the thought you're thinking, ideally. But something very new that I saw was URLs. URLs. Now, I don't want to get into any kinds of navigation bars, right? And then for your research, abstracts. What's an abstract? And if you get to go to a university library or a library that's not totally electrical, what's a card catalog? What will you find there? Another thing I found really surprising in this set of cards is a reference to data processing. These are all terms that I learned when I was learning to be a database manager with the IBM system. A database management system. And I was very surprised to find these included in this AP English language, because it is very, 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 very important for people to know. I mean, if you're creating a body of knowledge to teach yourself, to refer to use to teach other people, understanding the way a database works is very, very important. They even talk about structured query language, right? Primary sources versus secondary sources. Here's another surprise I found was common advertising. Full-time, part-time, accounts payable, accounts receivable, assistance, bookkeeping, commission, between, equal opportunity employer, general ledger. Yeah, so if you're looking for a job or you're reading the newspaper, it even has what that means in common business. Okay, so you can get a sense of this. And these are just the cards in the first category of reading. It'll talk about a claim when you make a statement that's different from a fact. Organization, problem, solution. Organization, problem, solution. Doesn't that remind you a little bit of David Icke? Organization, cause and effect. Organization, spatial order. Organization, chronological order. Organization, comparison and contrast. Organization, order of importance. All of these in that little category, order of importance, teach critical thinking skills. These are all critical thinking skills. So this is included in this. Talks about conclusions and what goes into making a conclusion. Textual evidence. Where did you read it? Was it a verifiable source? Do you believe it? Is it plausible? Counter argument, very important for debate and very important for critical thinking. Yes, that's what it says, but what if you turn it around and make it into something different? Does that change your meaning? Are you more convinced or less convinced? Do you feel more persuaded or discouraged from that particular meaning? Reliable sources, characters, and then it breaks them down. This is just such a remarkable set of cards. And because I was an literature major in college and as a graduate student, I can't tell you how thrilled I am when I just read these cards. I get excited. I get excited about the work. So now I'm going to share with you some of the cards in the writing section. That's reading. And you can see how many of these there are. I mean, this is going to be years of education for the student. And it's very, very comprehensive for teaching critical thinking skills. When you read, you have to be able to critically think in order to understand and in order to know what the author has said and where the author is going and what you've learned. It's very, very important. So learning how to have reading comprehension skills is absolutely crucial. But before you write, you have to know what you read. You have to know what you understand. And most importantly, you have to know what you think about what you understand. When I had students in college, they used to always beg me to tell them what I wanted on the test or on the papers. And I would always tell them, I want your thoughts. I want your thinking. I want your idea. I want your experience with the material. That's what I'm looking for. And they would get so frustrated. They thought it'd be so much easier if I would just ask them to feed back to me information that I gave to them about what I think or what somebody else thinks. But I was really into making people aware that they have their own authority. Intellectually, you have your own authority. You can develop your mind, you can develop your skills, you can develop your intelligence, and it's important that you do that. So in the writing part, I don't even know what this means. Audience. This is so important. I'll tell you, when I was writing term paper, when I was doing my dissertation, was when I realized how critically important the audience is. Who are you writing for? Who are you writing for? Who's your ideal audience? Because that will influence the direction that your narrative takes. And then it talks about rhetoric, ethos, pathos, logos. And each one of these is a different. So ethos means referring to ethics. Rhetoric is the art of speaking, of persuasive public speaking. That's what rhetoric is. So rhetoric is learning to cast your argument. So when you're writing, like, you want to have an audience and you have a point of view, generally your own point of view. So if your argument to convince your audience, to persuade your audience, to communicate your point of view, if it has to do with ethics and your credibility as a narrator, then it's considered the ethos of rhetoric. Pathos is a pathetic or emotional appeal, an appeal to the audience's sense of identity, self-awareness, or emotions. So when you're using rhetoric, when you're developing your rhetoric and you're taking an emotional appeal, it's called pathos. And then there's logos. This is the one that I use the most, I think. And it's a logical appeal, an appeal based on logic. So right here, just in these cards, you could stimulate 3 different writing projects for your children. 3 different writing projects. Write an essay designed to appeal to my logic. Write an essay designed to appeal to my emotions. Write an essay that convinces me you have integrity to speak, that you are a reliable narrator. And it talks about something as basic as topic. What is the topic? What is the main idea? You remember those big cards I brought out before? They're really great to have as well. So you can combine these with your writing assignment. You can combine these wonderful cards. You can put these up all around your home classroom while you're teaching English, while your children are writing their essays, because this will remind them of all of the rules and the things they need to think about. And this also prompts them on what to say. I mean, how many times has a student sat down to their piece of paper or their tablet or their notebook, whatever it is they're using, and then just looked at the blank screen, looked at the blank page, not knowing exactly what to write, exactly what to say? So these are wonderful for putting around the room while you're teaching the literature course. And then you've got these flashcards, and for your older students as well. So one of the first things, if you're writing a research paper, your thesis statement is very important. That's where you say what this paper is about. What are you writing it about? And that's usually the first paragraph in any paper that you write. You put in your thesis statement. And you might even have an introduction, which a lot of people write the introduction at the end when they're finished, after their paper's developed, because then they know where it went instead of trying to predict where it's going to go. Because a lot of the time, writing almost has a life unto itself. That as you write and use those parts of your brain where you process all of the information that you have read and experienced and been given, and you try to put them all into your statement. A lot of the time, it's nice to write your introduction when you're finished and to start with your thesis. What are you going to try to prove? What are you going to try to say? And then it just talks about, the parts of the essay. You've got your body paragraphs, right? You've got your conclusion. And it goes on that way, argumentative writing, informative writing, descriptive writing, narrative writing. And you can give your student, your homeschooler, examples of these. You can go through these cards and just pick out the ones that are needed for the assignment. And because of the breadth of knowledge and the level of knowledge that it covers, you'll be able to use these flashcards for many, many years. Like I said, syntax. That's pretty advanced. I don't know what that means. Open-ended sentences. I don't know what syntax is exactly myself. But I guess oh, here's the card. Thank goodness, huh? Thank goodness. Let's see, what is syntax? The study of syntax focuses on the ways in which specific words can be combined to create coherent meaning. For example, the simple rearrangement of words, I can run, is different from the question, can I run? Which is also different from the meaningless run, I can. Well, it's not meaningless to Yoda. Yoda would say run, I can. And there's nothing wrong with inverting the verb and putting the verb in first. Run, I can. It's just fine. So you can, don't feel like this is the Bible, or even the Bible. Don't feel like this is firm. it won't always have exactly what you want. But this is saying that there is a certain order to words that defines its meaning. Auditory syntax. Well, this is kind of advanced and specialized syntax. It pushes really into the deep minutia of linguistics, right? But not these words. These words are super important. I mean, if you're going to take an SAT test, the prefix and suffix become very important to know. And a list of prefixes is something you might want to include. I don't see it included here, right here, but simple sentences, compound sentences, that's grade school, right? So you have to go through the cards, to find the ones. But if you are doing homeschooling, it probably isn't a problem if you let your children go through the cards, because they might be able to put the data together even better than you can. Interrogative sentence, that's one that asks the question, right? This is such an exciting product. I just really have to share it with you, homeschooling parents, because I think this is an absolutely excellent homeschooling tool. I'll share other flashcard sets with you at another time, but let's move on to the last category in this advanced placements English language and composition flashcard set from Test Prep Books. Because free response is kind of complicated. Okay, because free response is very kind of I don't know. Free response is mostly about reading comprehension and responding to the cards and what they say. So, for example, compare and contrast the style of passages 1 and 2, and then it actually gives passages 1 and 2 on the back. So I think this is probably 5th grade, 6th grade to 8th, 9th, 10th grade level work, because I don't see I think the card with the passages on it. Yeah, you have to actually find the card with the passages on it. You see, there's the one of the passages. So it's like marked A5 AB. See, passage 1 is card 5A. Let me find this. Yeah, okay. So passage 1 is card 5A and B, and passage 2 is 5B. 5B, 5C continues passage 2. And then 5D says compare and contrast the style. So you have to know what style means of these 3 cards that hold the 2 passages. And then the answer is on the back. So this set of cards is very much about critical thinking skills and exegesis, delineating the narrative, describing what happens in the narrative. So it'll say, talk about the style, talk about the tone. I remember when I went to college, I got a C on one of my literature papers, and I went to the professor's office hours because he wrote on it, tone. And he didn't like the tone. And I didn't know what tone meant. I didn't know what it meant. And I asked the professor, well, what is tone? And do you know he couldn't tell me? He didn't know how to define tone. Anyway, then it says compare and contrast the sentence structure. So you actually might want to write the passages out on your whiteboard or your classroom paper, your whatever you use, because your student, or even print it out, your student is going to have to constantly refer to the passages. Then it says talk about the punctuation choices, and that'll let you teach the elusive meaning of the semicolon. A lot of people don't know how to use that. And then point of view. Do you know how exciting this is? Paragraph structure. Do you know that you could write a college term paper, a graduate school term paper, using this information? So if your student learns this before 18, they already have the skills of a college graduate in literature for writing. Look at the organizational structure of passages 1 and 2. Right? So this is just brilliant. Rhetorical canons. The first step in creating effective rhetoric, invention, arrangement, style. So you did want to go through these because you might want to teach, these rhetorical canons before you actually try to, describe things. Anyway, these cards are really super wonderful. I want to play with them. I just want to keep playing with them. But I found that with all of the flashcards. I didn't do a review of OR flashcards for the naval officer naval officer aptitude test, but it contained physics and mechanics and seafaring things, and it was very comprehensive, and it is really an excellent teacher. So that's the end of my homeschooler review of test prep flashcards. I highly recommend AP English language and composition. It can be used from preschool all the way until your child goes off to college or starts a profession. Thank you for joining me.